watching Roll Tide Daily, the new daily program for Crimson Tide fans, presented by SEC Country. Now, here's your host, former Alabama All-American, Mike Johnson.
Hello, everyone, and welcome in to day 2 of Roll Tide Daily here, presented by SEC Country. My name is Mike Johnson. I used to play at Bama. I used to bleed the Crimson, and I'm excited to bring you the best in the daily news from the Alabama Crimson Tide. This is edition number 2 of Roll Tide Daily. We made our debut yesterday, had a great show, talked about Tua Tagovailoa and his transfer comments. We had Chris Lowe on the show to kind of go back to some of the comments he made about Nick Saban and how long he plans on staying at Alabama. And plan on doing a lot of the same things today. So just like yesterday, I'm going to invite you guys to comment back in on Facebook, on YouTube, on whatever avenue for SEC Country Alabama you choose to comment on. We're going to take some of your questions. We're going to get some of your emotions. We're going to get some Bama stuff really rolling here on today's episode. We've got a lot coming up. We got John Parker Wilson later in the show. I mentioned yesterday that William Vallejos will be joining us later in the week. We're going to try to get SEC Country's Mark Burnett on here later in the week, and a lot of exciting guests coming up in the weeks to come. But as for now, let's get rolling on to topic number 1, and that is this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful prediction from Athlon Sports that comes out over the weekend. You guys know what Athlon is. I got a copy right here. Athlon Sports, college football predictions. You got Tua Tagovailoa sitting right there in the top corner. I don't think anybody could think of anything more beautiful to put on the cover. Athlon predicts Alabama as the 2018 national champions, and I had to ask myself the question, why wouldn't they, baby? Why wouldn't Alabama be picked to repeat as the college football playoff national champs after beating Georgia last year right here in Atlanta, Georgia, in the new Mercedes-Benz Dome? Athlon loves what the Alabama Crimson Tide are putting together, and here's what they had to say about Alabama moving forward this year in 2018. Alabama is the only team to go back-to-back since the start of the BCS era in 1998. History is working against Nick Saban's team, but the Crimson Tide are Athlon's pick to win it all in 2018. They go on to say that the Crimson Tide may need a couple of games to sort out the new faces on defense, talking about the secondary. However, this team now has more offensive firepower than in recent years. Assuming Tagovailoa is as good as expected, Saban is likely to hoist his 3rd national title in 4 seasons. Boy, I got to tell you, that is a lot of beauty coming up from the people that are over there at Athlon Sports. I don't see why you would be picking any differently. Nick Saban has proven time and time again that he can plug and play and install new starters on both sides of that football team. You got to look at the offensive line. You got to look at the wide receivers. I think that Athlon did a great job of diving into it. I really think that, obviously a bigger talking point might have been if Alabama was not picked. But I think the way that they go on to talk about some of these position groups from Alabama is really what the talking point comes to be. As far as quarterback rankings, Alabama's got the number 1. As far as running back rankings, Alabama's number 1. Wide receivers, Alabama's at number 5. Offensive line, Alabama at number 2. Over on the defensive line, Alabama's at number 5. Linebackers, Bama at number 1. Don't have any DBs, but I thought one of the most impressive things that I saw from this entire article talking about Alabama repeating as national champs, the number 1 coaching staff. Think about that now. Nick Saban has replaced, 6 coaches from last year's national title winning football team and somehow has put together what Athlon thinks is the number 1 coaching staff in the country. They add Coach Banks. They add Craig Kuligowski. They bring in Dan Enos. Michael Loxley gets promoted. Tosh Lapoy gets promoted to defensive coordinator. It's been plug and play for this football team. SEC also had 6 teams listed in the top 25. I think that's one of the most impressive stats there as well. You look at Alabama, they've got Georgia as a return contender coming back to the college football playoff there in the 3 slot. Auburn lands at number 7, 14 Mississippi State, 17 Florida, 25 Texas A&M. This is a projection. This is not a preseason poll, right? This is not where you come in and say, boy, as we sit right now, this team's number 1. This is what they're projecting for December and for January and for on down the road for college football. I think it's one of the most exciting things for Alabama fans to start to hear. You dig a little bit deeper into what they expect out of the football team, and you can't do that without talking about the cover boy, Tua Tagovailoa. Here's what they had to say about Tua coming up this next football season. I thought it was a great thing. Can we see that graphic, please? It's no secret Tagovailoa might be the most talented quarterback signed by Nick Saban since arriving in Tuscaloosa in 2007. The Hawaii native has all the talent needed to be ranked among the nation's best quarterback by the end of 2017. And we talked about this yesterday. This is the most prolific signal caller that Nick Saban has brought to Tuscaloosa in his 10 years there, 10-plus years at Alabama. He was never letting Tua walk out that door. I trust Nick Saban to really settle things in that quarterback room when it comes to Jalen Hurts, when it comes to Tua Tagovailoa. you're going to have some issues for the football team. Listen, it's not going to go without saying that you're not replacing a ton of DBs. You have a lot of guys back there in the secondary. Think about Deontay Thompson, Shaheem Carter. Think about all the names in that secondary you're having to replace last year. Ronnie Harrison, Minkah Fitzpatrick. But I don't know about you. I don't know if I trust any one person more than Nick Saban to be able to get this thing going in the right direction. Got a lot of roll tides rolling in here in the comment section. Thank you guys for watching the show today. Josh Trotter supporting Mike, but he's a Georgia fan. I'm not going to read that comment, but I appreciate you watching the show. Becky Burton-Pritchard says, roll tide. Nate Gettleman, Nick Saban is never the underdog. Boy, you got to agree with that, don't you? You got to love Nick Saban, and I think that's one of the best things about this article from Athlon here is what they project for Nick Saban. Think of all the players. What is it, 16, 17, that Alabama is losing to the NFL off last year's team. Think about how mind-boggling that is that Athlon thinks that they're going to absolutely make a return trip back to the college football playoff and be able to pull it off again without any starting DBs coming back, with a junior college transfer in Savion Smith. They expect Patrick Surtain Jr. to start at the other corner, which I think is a huge deal. They trust Nick Saban, just like us Alabama fans do, to be able to go back and get it. I think that is such a big point to be talking about. Now, go over to the YouTube comment section page. Jonathan Jennings says, I wouldn't be surprised if Georgia makes it in again. I actually wouldn't be shocked either. I think that when you look at both of these things, when you look at both of those schedules matching up, I think Georgia and Alabama are going to be favored by double digits in most of the games they play this year. I would be shocked if those two teams don't land in Atlanta towards the end of the year. So, we're going to talk about Tua Tagovailoa a lot on this show all summer. We're going to talk about what Nick Saban has, the work he has cut out in front of him. We're going to talk about a lot of things, but we're also going to be talking about, obviously, the march to the national title game, and I think a lot of that starts with this Athlon magazine right here, those preseason rankings, those postseason projections, if you will. One of the guys that won't be making the trip to the national title of this game is Brandon Kennedy. When you talk about 2018, Brandon Kennedy has elected to move on from the Alabama football program. He's posted his farewell letter yesterday to Alabama fans, essentially just saying that, listen, I loved my time at Alabama. After much thought and consideration, I have chosen to move on. Now, you're going to hear a lot about that in the news. He's trying to transfer to Auburn and Tennessee. Now, I'm kind of the thought process. If he wants to go to Auburn and Tennessee, let him. Tennessee is really hard up for linemen right now. I understand why he would want to transfer to a place like that. He's a graduate transfer, but you're going to hear a lot about that in the news coming up. Brandon Kennedy has been turned down in his initial appeal to Alabama to let him transfer within the SEC. So that's going to be a huge talking point coming up for a lot of the national media heads and a lot of people here at SEC Country and also on the show talking about Brandon Kennedy transferring. For topic number 2 today, we're going to pivot over to Andy Staples from Sports Illustrated. I thought he wrote a great article yesterday, and boy, you're going to love this headline. Nick Saban is living in the heads of his competitors, and I don't think I could have said it better myself. And he goes on to talk about some of the rules that have been implemented across college football. And really, he had a lot of great points. I think that he's really telling the truth when you talk about Nick Saban really kind of being one step ahead, I guess. When you talk about going back to 2008, he's got you're not allowed to go on the road in the spring and be able to recruit. When you talk about 2011, the oversigning, 25 signee limit. 2014, Nick Saban tried to come up with a 10-second rule. It got denied. What did he try to do? Hired Lane Kiffin to run a hurry-up offense. We're also going to talk in a couple of minutes to John Parker Wilson. The other rule that Andy Staples brings up is the not bringing older players, veteran players back to practice. I'd like to call that the John Parker Wilson rule. Nick Saban did this with John Parker Wilson and Blake Sims famously to come back and run the scout team. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I think of Nick Saban, I always think of being one step ahead. And that's the beauty of what's going on in Alabama right now. When you have all these other coaches that are getting together and they're talking about, we really need to make this rule. Now, then the rule that Andy Staples is talking about coming up right now, that's going to be voted on here coming up, is the 20 headset limit for college football, or the SEC, or whatever you want to call it. 20 headsets being the limit. Nick Saban's got too many people on the sidelines. He's got too many coaches, too many people that are on the headset, too many people listening to what's going on. Guess what? That's because he likes he likes the opinions of everybody on the sideline. Nick Saban's one step ahead. Now, Nick Saban's going to move on from this better than any other coach in college football. Nick Saban's going to move on and say, you know what? I don't mind 20 headsets. If that's a rule for everybody else, then I'm good with that. And I think that when you really get down into it, Nick Saban's going to move on probably better than anybody else is able to react to this particular topic. Nick Saban's always a step ahead. He's probably got somebody that's up there making signs, making flashcards for other people to watch what's going on in that headset so that they can make the communication a lot better. But I think this is further evidence exactly what Andy Staples is talking about. He's talking about the fact that all these other people are worried about what Nick Saban's doing, and Nick Saban's worried about what he's going to do to make himself better. right? It's the Nick Saban process, isn't it? It's one day at a time. Hey, I'm going to focus on myself. I'm going to get this program better. I'm going to do this to make sure we're good in recruiting. You know what? If I can't go out in the spring and I can't leverage that and I can't outwork the other coaches in the spring, then guess what? I'm going to double my time in the fall. I'm going to do these things. I'm going to make sure I'm taking helicopter rides. You know what? If we can't have 20 headsets on the sideline, then guess what? I'm going to have everybody sharing information. I'm going to make sure that everybody is talking amongst themselves so they know what the football calls are going to be. They know what we're talking about on the headset. Appreciate you guys kind of joining in the show. We got Robbie Harris says, love your show. Jordan Casey, Roll Tide from Montgomery, Alabama. Greg Skelton, a man after my own heart, Roll Tide from Pensacola. Becky Burton Pritchard says, I don't think it should be allowed to transfer within the same conference. Now, Becky, I understand what you're talking about there as far as the Brandon Kennedy news goes. He's trying to go to Auburn. He's trying to go to Tennessee. Those are two teams that are on Alabama's schedule in the upcoming years. I think that's a little bit of a gray area for me because a lot of times I sit on the player side of this. I don't know if you should allow it in terms of guys that are going to be on the upcoming schedule, but the guy graduated. So if he wants to head off to Florida, if he wants to head off to South Carolina, I'm probably okay with that. Auburn and Tennessee is going to be another topic to be going on. He also talks about Jonathan Jennings over on YouTube. That is Saban having his thumb directly on the compliance department. I absolutely agree with that. That is Saban absolutely toeing the line when it comes to compliance. But we talked about him just a minute ago. I promised you that John Parker Wilson would be a guest on today's show. We just got talking about what I think should be called the John Parker Wilson rule. And John Parker, I think we've got him on the phone right now. JPW, how you doing, brother?
Congrats on the new show. Very cool. Very excited about it.
I appreciate that, man, and I appreciate you joining us today. And we started off a conversation a minute ago, and Andy Staples was talking about how Nick Saban is seemingly ahead of other college football coaches when it comes to toeing the line, when it comes to really coming up with his own rules, doing things differently, doing things that no other coaches are doing. And I got a rule that I got to tell you, I think it should be called the John Parker Wilson rule. You were invited back to practice a couple of years ago to go in and be a scout team pro-style quarterback. I know your body had to be sore the next day. Can you kind of bring us in a little bit on the conversation of how exactly that happened, how Coach Saban and company got in touch with you, and how that practice turned out for you?
Yeah, I thought it was a joke, right? So Coach Cochran called me, I think it was a Tuesday or a Wednesday, and called me at around lunchtime. I was actually going to get lunch, and he said, JP, hey, man, we need you to come to practice, which in something very unusual. You know, I talk to Coach Cochran all the time. But I was like, yeah, what time do you need me there? You know, I knew practice started around 3:30. He's like, we need you to get here like 2. I'm like, that's weird. He's like, but we need you to actually practice. And I'm like, what are you talking about, practice? He's like, yeah. He's like, we got a couple of guys hurt. Coach Saban asked if you were available, if you'd come down. And, of course, if Coach Saban asks you to do something, there's only one answer. You can't say no. So I drove down to Tuscaloosa, filled in, and I was like, I got to warn you, I have not thrown a football in 4 or 5 years since I got done playing. But it went pretty well. But, man, I could still throw it pretty good, but I was out of gas. I didn't have it like I used to. And for the first time, I had to climb in the cryotherapy chamber after because, sure enough, I had to come down the next day.
Boy, people in the comment section right now on Facebook are absolutely loving it. And I got to ask you, too, being around that quarterback room, being around some of those situations, I don't think Tua was there when you got a chance to go into practice, but I know that Jalen Hurts was on board. Talk to us a little bit about some of the conversation back and forth between Jalen Hurts. Do you have a prediction for how things play out this fall between Tua? I mean, we're reading Athlons today. We're talking about Athlon Sports. Tua is ranked the number 2 quarterback in the country out of 130 starting quarterbacks by Athlon's going into 2018. What's your thoughts on that?
Wow, number 2 in the country. You know, I think he's a great quarterback. I think he had a heck of a half last year against Georgia coming in. And he got put in a really tight spot. We were down. He hadn't played a ton, especially against the first team defense throughout the year. And I think he just played so well. I think he handled the situation great. I think the same for Jalen. I think the way he handled everything, if you were writing a script for how it was going to be played out, you couldn't have done a better job. I think we've got a great problem, and we've been talking about it all offseason, is who's going to be the quarterback. Is it going to be Jalen? Is it going to be Tua? You know, I think they both have a lot of strength. Jalen is, I think, 26-2 as a starter. Now, that's pretty impressive. I don't care if you don't throw the ball one time. Quarterbacks, we're judged off one thing. It's not how many touchdowns you throw. It's how many games you win. And that's what it's all about. Jalen has gone out there and proven he's been able to do that. Came in as a true freshman, led us to the national championship against Clemson, ran into a buzzsaw that was Deshaun Watson in Clemson, who just peaked at the perfect time, led us to the national championship last year. but then comes in Tua, who has a just completely different skill set that can throw the ball, that can just do different things than Jalen can. And not knocking Jalen or anybody, they're just two separate quarterbacks. I think it's going to be complete nightmare for the Louisville defensive coordinator to get ready for the first game of the season against Alabama. Coach Saban's definitely not going to name a starter, and to have to prepare for those two different types of quarterbacks is going to be a problem for anybody throughout the year, because I think every coordinator is going to have to get ready for a Tua offense and a Jalen offense.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thinking about it from the role of a defensive coordinator, boy, that definitely adds an extra element. And we've been talking about this really all summer here on SEC Country, and I tried to think back to our playing days. I tried to think back to if there was any quarterbacks that had to switch positions, and the only guy I could come up with, Jimmy Johns from Mississippi. You know, he kind of carved out a role as a running back, later moved on to linebacker. If Tua Tagovailoa does win this quarterback competition, do you think there's a role? Do you think there's a possibility at all for Jalen Hurts to get some snaps, 25%, 30%, 40% of the snaps, or change positions? What would you expect that role to be for Jalen Hurts?
I think there's always a role for Jalen. I think, if nothing else, he's one of the best leaders we've seen. Gets the guys, and we've seen the team take on his demeanor and how he handles himself. We've seen his athletic ability running the ball. That's one of his best skill sets, is pulling it down and becoming a runner. And very elusive with his feet, very slippery. You never really takes a big hit. So I think you find a way to put him in the game no matter what. Maybe that's with him and two in the backfield at the same time. I don't know. But I think, Jimmy Johnson is a good example. We saw Denard Robertson. He did it not at Michigan, but made the transition in the NFL. I think he's to the Jacksonville Jaguars, became a running back. You find guys like that, and you just find a way to get them the ball, to put the balls in their hands. That's the number one job as offensive coordinators. Find your best talent, get them chances to be successful. So I think whatever happens, and I'm not making a prediction by any stretch of the imagination, but you find ways to get Jalen on the field and in the ball in the hands.
Boy, I couldn't agree with you more when it comes to that topic, and trying to get Jalen on the field, trying to make sure you carve out a niche for him, and trying to make sure you keep him on campus just for if nothing else, depth concerns. Now, I think we might have lost John Parker. Let's see if we can get him back on the phone. The question I was going to ask John Parker next, and I'll go ahead and bring this up to the crowd, because I think a lot of times when you talk about the outlook of the SEC, you got to talk about two names that were under Nick Saban for the last couple of years. That's Jeremy Pruitt and Kirby Smart. Now, JP made waves a couple of weeks ago, especially here around SEC Country Studios, when he compared Jeremy Pruitt to Kirby Smart. He said, I think for Alabama, Jeremy Pruitt actually is the scarier of the two. And I was going to read this back to John Parker Wilson. I can't wait to get his thoughts on this. Hopefully we can get him back on the line. I know he's busy over there in Birmingham, Alabama. John Parker has a great role right now as a financial advisor. He is always doing good things in his post-Bama career. I also wanted to get John Parker's thoughts moving forward. We're going to talk about this here coming up about Joe Burrows, and so hopefully we can get him back on the line. I think we've got John Parker back on the line right now. JP, I was going to pose the question to you a minute ago. You brought this up on Jocks a couple of weeks ago, and you made waves throughout the SEC Country Studios to a lot of the writers and a lot of people that work with me every day. You said that Jeremy Pruitt is scarier at Tennessee than Kirby Smart is at Georgia. Now, can you bring us in on the mindset a little bit more on that? Because I tended to disagree with it when you said it, but I think the fact that Jeremy Pruitt's at a place like Tennessee where you play him every year, what was your thought process on that comment?
Okay, so this did get some waves and became national news pretty quick. But you're missing one of the key parts of the statement was long term. I'm not talking about this year. I'm talking about long term. I just think Jeremy Pruitt is going to be a great college football coach. I was with him at Hoover High School. I was with him at Alabama when he was a recruiting guy, saw him coach, knows how he works with people, and I just think he is going to be a fantastic head coach. And I wasn't throwing shots at Kirby by any stretch of the imagination. I was just saying where he's at, he really scares me being in Tennessee. We do play them every year. Now, Kirby's in a different stratosphere right now and where he's at and where the Georgia program is. So the key term right there was long term, because I don't know if Jeremy's going to be at Tennessee for 5 years or 15 years, but I just know his makeup and what kind of coach he's going to be. Maybe not this year, but he's going to get that Tennessee program in a direction they haven't been in such a long time. And from an Alabama fan, it scares me because at some point you got to revert to the mean, and we've beat them now 11 years in a row. A guy like him can rally the troops and circle the wagons and get their program in the right direction, because I think if you look at the old Tennessees back in the day, when they were successful with Phil Fulmer, they're recruiting nationally. They're getting quarterbacks from California. They're getting receivers from Alabama. They're getting running backs from Georgia. I think Pruitt and his ability to recruit is bringing that national recruiting in to a place like Knoxville that's been starving for that for so long.
Yeah, boy, you got to love the national waves that you were able to make with that comment. That simple comment. You got an Alabama guy talking on the radio in Birmingham, Alabama, and it obviously reverberated across SEC land when you talk about Paul Feinbaum, Sports Illustrated, all these guys picking up. JP, the one last question I have for you, I wanted to get your thoughts on this topic because we're going to talk about Joe Burrows, the Ohio State transfer quarterback headed down to LSU this upcoming season. This is a new thing for me, man. This did not happen that much when we were back in college. I don't feel like transfers were that big of a deal. When you talk about Shea Patterson, the Hunter Johnson news out of Clemson right now, Joe Burrows is headed down to LSU. What do you make of all this culture in college football right now where these transfer quarterbacks, listen, if I can't get this place, I'm going to leave this program and head elsewhere? This wasn't something that was ever on your mind, was it?
No, not at all. And it wasn't even talked about in the locker room because I think football is you grow up and it's a team game and you're fighting for your brother out there and it becomes really a brotherhood of people you go out there and you spend so much time with, and it's changed. It wasn't when we were around, and I don't necessarily blame the players. I think the schools invest a lot in these players to get them there recruiting wise, to get them ready with food, nutrition, resources, facilities, anything you need as a player is there. So that's kind of why I have a problem with guys transferring after they've now been the school has invested in them for 4 years. Can't be too mad at them, though. The rules are the rules, and kind of like we were talking about with Coach Saban earlier, as long as you stay within the rules, then don't be mad at the player. We got to change the rules if we don't like the culture of the game. It just is what college football is. And, I tell Alabama fans, usually we're on the beneficial side of this, right? So we're getting a guy like Jacob Coker, who came from Florida State, who ended up winning a national championship. I don't personally like it, the guys transferring, but if we can benefit and be within the rules, then by all means. But it's the culture of college football now. I know Coach Saban doesn't like it. I think he talked about last week at the region tournament that if you want college football to have free agencies within the conference, and that's the way we're headed, then that's what we're going to be. If not, change the rules. And I think this honestly puts the coaches in a bad situation. A coach doesn't want to have to tell a kid you can't leave or you can't go there. He wants what's best for the kid. But the rules are really handicapping the coaches right now and putting them in a really bad situation. So I think eventually they're going to do something to make it more black and white instead of, okay, maybe he can go within the SEC or maybe can't. It's just putting the coaches in a tough spot right now.
Boy, you got to love the thoughts there from John Parker Wilson, obviously a good buddy of mine, a former quarterback at Alabama. And JPW, thanks for joining us on today's show, brother. Hope to hear from you again soon here on Roll Tide Daily.
You got it, Mike. Congrats. Hope everything goes well, and look forward to talking to you soon.
All right, brother. Have a good one. We got a ton of comments coming in here in the comment section. Brett Tears Jr. says, I just don't know how Jeremy and that fan base will react to a 6-6 potential first season. Talking about the comparison between Kirby Smart and Jeremy Pruitt. Jeremy obviously up there at Tennessee. I've got him going 6-6. I think that's going to be the biggest hurdle for them. I think Jeremy's done some good things. When you talk about some of the recruits he's been able to bring in, Wanya Morris, some of the guys he's already got on board, I think he's moving in the right direction. But boy, it's going to be an uphill battle for them in year one. I think the over-under for wins for them right now sits right there at 6.5. So it's going to be tough for them. You got a lot of Roll Tides coming in here. Robbie Harris asked Mike, I know you've been asked 1,000 times, but how is it playing for Saban and what makes him the best? It's attention to detail and it's his ability to evolve, right? We talked about evolutions yesterday. We talked about him really pushing the envelope, towing the line as far as rules go. That's going to be something to keep looking forward to as long as he's staying at Alabama. Nick Saban's going to toe the line. He's going to pay attention to details. William Lee is chiming in, talking about Tua at number 2 on the list out of 130 starting quarterbacks for Athlon. Kind of a crazy thing. I agree with it. He says Tua at number 2 is crazy, but certainly should be number 1 from Alabama. I agree with that. I think Tua is a starting quarterback. I think he will be a Heisman contender. But number 2 out of every starting quarterback before he's ever started a game, to me, is a little bit of a reach. All right, We're going to pivot now, and we're going to start to turn to a little bit of something I like to call the SEC Through. This is where we try to bring in some of the biggest news from around the conference, and I can't go anywhere bigger than something that affects Alabama fans on a yearly basis, and that's Joe Burrows, the Ohio State quarterback, grad transfer, heading down to LSU this offseason. He made the announcement on his Twitter. I think maybe LSU welcomed him on their Twitter page. I think we've got that graphic to put up. Joe Burrows, look at that. Hold that tiger. LSU welcomes grad transfer quarterback Joe Burrow 10 to the class of 2018. And I got to tell you, this is a big deal for LSU, and it's a big deal for Alabama fans. It's a big deal for LSU for a couple of reasons. First of all, this is not just a one-year Band-Aid. This is a 2-year starting quarterback. This is not just a Danny Etling that shows up from Purdue. This is a guy that is a very good quarterback. Just couldn't really find his niche up at Ohio State. I think he's going to bring great things to LSU. I think he opens up that offense. Now, what is that offensive line going to be? What is Steve Ensminger as the offensive coordinator going to be? What really is Ed Orgeron as a recruiter and a CEO style of head coach? I think those are all fair questions to ask. But I think the one thing that you really had to question moving towards this year, Lowell Narcisse, Miles Brennan, McMillan down there, the three-way battle for the starting quarterback, I got to tell you, I think it's coming to an end. I know that they're welcoming him, saying, you know what, you get a chance to battle for the starting job. But this is a guy who left Ohio State because he couldn't be the starter. I find it hard to believe that Ed Orgeron is not selling him on immediate playing time. I think he becomes a starting quarterback at LSU. I think I'd be shocked to learn that he wasn't already in meetings with Steve Ensminger trying to figure out that offense. I think that he brings a live arm. I think he brings mobility. I think he kind of checks that position off for LSU moving forward the next couple of years. This is a top-tier quarterback. Now, there is a ton of wide receiver potential out there for LSU. They've got guys that run 4.4. They've got 6'5 guys. Can they protect a guy like Joe Burrow back in the pocket? I think that's going to be the biggest question to ask moving forward for LSU. Also of note from LSU, the passing of Billy Cannon over the weekend. He was 80 years old. He is LSU's only Heisman Trophy winner. And I think all fan bases around the SEC really have a guy like this, that really your entire program looks up to. You keep them close. I know at Alabama, Joe Namath and Bart Starr and other guys like that. So our condolences go down to the LSU family and make sure that we pay attention to the passing of Billy Cannon and pay our respects to them. In other SEC news, we might have another new transfer rule coming up. We talked about transfers a lot today. It's kind of transfer season when you talk about the end of the spring semester. The new transfer rule the SEC is trying to put into place, and this is aimed directly at Ole Miss, and this is absolutely to the benefit of Florida coming up with Van Jefferson. This is what was put out by Dan Walken today. The Southeastern Conference will vote on a proposal at its spring meetings next week that would lift all conference restrictions on athletes who want to transfer from one league member to another if their original school receives a postseason ban. And this is of note for a couple of reasons. First of all, this did not apply to Shea Patterson moving up to Michigan. Shea Patterson was moving out of the conference, moving up to the Big Ten. This did not apply to him. But when you talk about Van Jefferson down at Florida, this is a guy who did not apply yet for that waiver because he knew this rule might be coming down. And I think it's a fair rule. I think anybody who's not an Ole Miss fan right now really feels that this is a fair rule, that if you were sold a bill of goods and you signed on the dotted line for one school, that, hey, listen, if this is a postseason ban and I don't have the ability to win an SEC title or a national title, then let me get out of here and go somewhere to a school that absolutely upholds their end of the bargain. I don't think Ole Miss has been able to do that. So to end the show today, we're going to pivot away from the SEC through. I appreciate everybody's comments coming in. They're still rolling in. I think that Robbie Harris has a ton. R.I.P. Billy Cannon, Brett Tierce Jr., this isn't baseball. Travis Foskey, this definitely puts a gutsy call to put two in after half. I appreciate all you guys' comments in. We got a ton of roll tides. We've had a ton of questions coming in. I appreciate the interaction. We're going to try to get to more of those in the future as we don't have as many guests coming on. John Parker Wilson, obviously, thanks to him. We're going to pivot away from that, though, and we're going to go to something I think you guys are really going to love. I don't know if you know this or not, but Scott Cochran, the strength coach in Alabama, he has a text message chain that every day, almost every day, especially during the football season, he sends out a video or he sends out a quote or he sends out something that he thinks is going to get you pumped up about Alabama football. And yesterday I got that text message from Scott Cochran and I opened it up and I thought I saw a piece of Alabama Bear Bryant nostalgia. This is what Scott Cochran sent out yesterday to everybody on his tech chain, including former players, current players, media members. This is a Bear Bryant commercial from back in the day. See how much you like this little piece of nostalgia right here.
One of the first things we tell our players is to keep in touch with their families. And when our freshmen first arrive, we ask them to write a postcard home right then. We keep them pretty busy, but they always have time to pick up the phone and call. And it's real important to keep in touch. Have you called your mama today? I sure wish I could call mine.
Reach out and touch someone.
Well, you got to love that from Scott Cochran from Bear Bryant back there. I got to imagine that was somewhere around 1977, something like that. So you got to love that video. Got a bunch of comments coming on that. Roll Tide. Brett Tears Jr. gives us a yeah. That's my man, Scotty Cochran. Appreciate all the comments coming in today. That's going to do it for Roll Tide Daily. I had a blast on the show today. Make sure you guys are sharing. Make sure you guys are following us on SEC Country's Alabama page there on Facebook. We're also on Instagram. We're also on YouTube. We're also on Twitter. And I will be here every Monday through Thursday at 1 o'clock Eastern Time, noon Central, to bring you the latest in Alabama football news and a lot of other sports and a lot of other fun stuff. So thanks for joining us today. Have a good day, everybody, and Roll Tide.
You've been watching Roll Tide Daily, the new daily program for Crimson Tide fans, presented by SEC Country.